Hey. Oh, that's right. There's no more because this is a 4-segment show, which has been really epic, and I'm very happy about. As I was talking in the break to Robert Graham, we're going to be in Atlanta for Hacker Halted, October 10th and 11th. EC Council is offering our listeners 15% discounts for bootcamp courses or workshops. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/hackerhalted and register now. It's going to be a lot of fun. I've never been to Hacker Halted. I've been to Atlanta a couple times, but I've never been to Hacker Halted, so I'm excited. I'm actually doing the one of the keynotes at Hacker Halted.
I think the only time I've ever been to Atlanta was the airport.
Atlanta, yeah. Many of us that travel in security have probably been to Atlanta Airport at least a dozen times or more.
Yep.
Right. But yeah, so I get to spend some time there, which I haven't in quite some time. I'm excited about it, actually. New conference, and there's the cigar lounge I'm excited about. That's like the kind of like speakeasy hacker kind of thing. You got to like know the code to the phone booth to open the door that we talked about a while back on the show. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure if you're a listener and you want to attend a cool conference that you're there. We'll be there recording interviews, doing the full gamut at Hacker Halted. So it's pretty awesome.
And I thought he was talking about Atlanta Airport, but anyway.
No, not at the. I mean, we're going to go to the airport. We're going to leave the airport and we're going to go to a hotel and then be at the conference and the whole thing right in Atlanta, Joff.
Thanks for spelling it out.
Sometimes I gotta mostly spell it out for myself to make sure I cover all the bases and get through my announcements and things like that. Have you guys seen the Docker vulnerability?
Which one? No,
there was a recent one that potentially it's a race condition vulnerability. I'll cover it at a high level. I tested it, even started looking at some of the source code, and I still don't understand it. You can run the Docker commands inside a Docker container, and there's some race condition where if you hit it right, you can write files to the host system instead of the containerized system. So there was proof of concept code that was published as well as a full write-up on the vulnerability. I thought it was pretty interesting. I think we speculated probably a few years ago that these types of things would happen. And, here we are. And there has been a pull request put in for Docker on how to fix it. And certainly, there hasn't been a patch issued yet, but the proof of concept exploit was published basically to raise awareness. So I thought I would mention it on the show. Joff, have you seen this particular vulnerability? It's my story number 7.
I have not seen it, I will admit. But it doesn't sound surprising, though. The fact you can run Docker commands inside of Docker to access the host, that part's a little bit surprising. But
it was surprising to me, too. I had never run a Docker command like inside of a Docker container before.
So, yeah, I think we should. I think that's going to open up a whole new family of research there, actually, considering the nature of it.
It's interesting. They call it a time of check to time of use, or TOCTOU bug, which is essentially in the class of race condition bugs. There was Alexa Saria. He's a senior software engineer for containers at SUSE Linux. So in his explanation, he's talking at a really high engineer level. Like, I have a lot of respect for this, for Alexa, certainly. And it talks about basically the Docker CP command. You can create a race condition and as example code, which is, I didn't get a chance to, because I did a technical segment, that's what I was prepping for. I ran some of these things really quick to test them, and there, of course, because it's me, there was errors and stuff like that. But everyone should definitely check it out. As I think this is not going to be the last, certainly, kind of Docker exploit that allows that kind of basically that guest to host communication. So, and hopefully we get a patch pretty soon, because I run Docker as well as a lot of other people.
So a lot of people are running Docker.
A lot of other people. What else was interesting? before you answer that, I did want to talk about, and I didn't get a chance to read this article thoroughly at all, what a teen grade hacker's confession can teach us. So this was basically someone that hacked for grades, and it started his freshman year in high school. They got handed administrator credentials to log in. He said, when I couldn't log into my computer during class my freshman year of high school, my teacher came over and gave me the administrator login and password. I thought maybe we could use that somewhere else, and started looking and found out that it worked across every computer on the network. I think it goes back to our previous conversation about educators being not as well educated on basics of security, which stem from passwords and credentials.
Yep, and I think from that perspective, they're just so worried about having things stop them from being able to do their job of teaching in the moment that they sometimes log kids in with their credentials, or they give them admin credentials just to be able to get in, without realizing that that then gives them the opportunity to like escalate privileges to that level of actually being able to enter grades and do all the kinds of things that they do, especially in systems that have single sign-on, right? So if I get into your Google and your Google locks me into, or allows me to access your student information system, I can then change grades, change my friends' grades, and do all these other kinds of things.
Just like the movie War Games.
Just like the movie War Games.
So it's really a naivete issue.
Yeah, and a convenience issue, right? Because the teachers are really concerned about student learning and less so about the privacy and security components, especially around personally identifiable information, which then leads to those vulnerabilities.
It's an interesting convergence of what's the word? Motivation, almost a need. Brings that to the surface. Yeah. Fascinating.
Then they hacked the camera systems as well.
Yeah, that's pretty common because they'll often leave the default password, even if you don't have that access. They've done that in the UK and other places where they have, still default passwords on these IoT devices, and so people can then access them, and they're kind of like streamed online without any kind of credentials. What's
interesting is they also talk about how they used keyloggers as well.
Yep, we just talked about that.
What you were saying earlier, Mike, was, let's hire these students to help secure the environment.
Right.
And we had a very intense conversation last year, the year before, at a local conference we did at Roger Williams University for Cyber Patriot students. And we were concerned that educators and administrators of the schools would see behavior that was potentially unethical as hacking and want to punish the students, with zero opportunity for those students to be a teachable moment and offer them the opportunity to use their skills for good. And I don't think this should be 100% of the time. Right. What we decided upon, and I was glad that myself and others were part of this conversation, was we really have to uncover, and this is hard, the intent of the student.
100%.
Right? If it's curiosity and whatever, but if the intent is, like, you can see that it's clearly malicious, which isn't always a cut and dry 0-1 kind of thing, right? But noticing the intent of the student, I think, is important, and identifying the students that we can nurture them, we can do this, versus the student that's like clearly malicious, they should be punished. I still don't think, I don't know, maybe they shouldn't be expelled 100% of the time, right? Yeah. Mike, I want to get your thoughts, and this is your area.
Totally. Right? So I think there's a couple different places, right? So I think if the student's just curious and trying to like access or see where there are vulnerabilities and scan and do things like that, I think that's like absolutely good white hat behavior, right? Then you have the kids who are trying to do this for, whether it's to change their grades or do other things like that you can kind of like start to figure out. And if it was the teachers that made a mistake in allowing them that access, then you can have that conversation that becomes...
It's a teachable moment for everyone.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But you also have a lot of circumstances where oftentimes in ways that have a gender dynamic to them as well, you have things like revenge porn, or things where students are getting pictures of other students naked traded online and things like that.
Or bullying that takes a digital... Yeah,
for sure.
I've heard of stories of that in the school systems where my kids are going.
And so I think that's a really big deal. But I think that there are different ways to deal with it, right? Like, I don't think you need to bring in the police necessarily unless it escalates to deal with that, because there are some school systems where like laws in certain states make it such that you need to charge that as a federal crime, right, or as like a state crime because it's the distribution of pornography, or the distribution of something like that, and states are starting to play with those laws too. So like there are all these different levels of really big challenges.
Pornography aside, I think if you go to bullying,
and bullying for sure.
I've had these conversations actually with the state law enforcement here in Rhode Island.
Yep.
And what John Alfred has told me is like the schools do a increasingly better job of policing the bullying and cyberbullying.
Yes.
Kind of classifying that in bullying.
Yes.
And not like prosecuting and bringing in law enforcement for that. Like, however the bullying takes place, cyber or not,
right,
the schools have developed a really good regimen and rules and policies around bullying.
And the standard is substantially disruptive to the educational environment, right? And so like if this is actually impacting children such that they can't learn anymore, right, because you've done this and this has an impact, even if that behavior is outside of school, then it is something that the school can get involved in. But I think there are better and worse ways to get involved. Right. When you can be more restorative, that's
I was encouraged to hear that schools had, even in the cyber realm, come around to really educating themselves and having clear policies and enforcing those policies when it comes to bullying.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's again, and there's an element of this that should be much more proactive oftentimes than it actually is, because a lot of these things are reactive in the moment of like, oh shoot, this thing happened, we need to deal with this right now.
Escalated to this point, right?
Yeah. Whereas like this could have been dealt with much earlier on.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Well, I think it's like any, security thing, right?
100%.
The earlier or development thing, right, Joff? The earlier you deal with those bugs or those issues, the less of an issue they are down the road.
Yep.
Oh no, that's absolutely true. I mean, we go through this all the time in all of the things we act with penetration testing. I mean, it's the earlier we get in the life cycle, and some of our customers are coming around to this. It's taking some time. The better off they are down the road, right?
Absolutely. What else was big in the news? I had a lot of stories this week. I did want to mention my story number 15, analyzing first stage shellcode. Loved this write-up. I didn't, dig too deep into it again because I had a lot of things on my plate today. But I thought this was a great write-up in reverse engineering by essentially Xavier Mertens and Didier Stevens, two people who I have the utmost respect for. So make sure you check out that technical write-up. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Those are the guys that do the Stormcast, right?
They are on the Internet Storm Center for SANS, both of them, yes. And accomplished security researchers in their own right. So
I listen to their stuff every day.
Yeah, both of which have been on the show as well. So they did a great write-up on analyzing shellcode. So fantastic. It was interesting. I'm really frustrated with some of the technology. Well, I think digital media in general that kind of limits you. Like on some sites, I can only view so many articles. Yeah. On many sites, I have to disable my ad blocker. On some sites, that's not even good enough. They want me to register for the content. It's all really frustrating. Yep. One of the ones that I ran into that I actually couldn't read because I had reached my limit on a particular website, or just the whole article wasn't there. One was trends in cybersecurity to watch. Don't know what that was all about. What I thought was an interesting opportunity for our listeners to hear what we think are the trends in in cybersecurity.
Can I give one recommendation potentially?
Absolutely.
I have fallen in love with Firefox containers. Mm-hmm. So I have 15 different containers, and it basically sandboxes the different sets of tabs so the cookies don't share across.
Is it like a Docker container for your Firefox browser, or is it?
Yeah. Okay. So it basically, it allows you to then open, 10 you can open 10 articles for Washington Post in this one, and then 10 in this one, and 10 in this one. So you never hit a limit. So you can just keep using more containers. Basically, they created it so Facebook can't track you across all these things if you create a Facebook container.
I looked into that 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was kind of proof of concept. Some people who were really good with containers had given presentations about containerizing applications like web browsers on your system. And it was, but it sounds like it's progressed since then.
So theirs is just an extension now. So it's super easy. It's super easy. And it's just a really nice way to not have your information. Also, I have 12 Google accounts from the different schools and districts that I work in.
Yeah, because so every school district has a Google account. Yeah.
Right. And as opposed to having to switching with the Google mess.
Yeah.
Nice. Interesting.
So trends in cybersecurity,
So you use Firefox in a container to log into your Google, because I use Chrome, which I'm not.
Yep.
Believe me, especially being a Linux user, Chrome, like I sometimes, like, if Chrome was like a thing in my office that I could punch, I would do that.
Totally.
Because it eats so much CPU.
And that's the sad part, is that's why I switched away from Firefox, because Firefox became the memory hog.
Right.
But now it's almost like
and the CPU hog.
And the new version of Firefox is doing a lot better on speed, like in the last year or so.
It's true.
They just about rewrote the whole code base, though. They made an enormous rewrite. It's turned into a pretty amazing product.
It's interesting. Like, I was like, well, I'm going to spec out a new Linux computer for myself. And I'm like, I'm going to do 32 gigs of RAM. And I'm going to do like a modern i7. I think it's got 4 or 8 cores. And I'm like, for what I do, I'm like, that should... But then I looked at the utilization of Chrome on these systems. And I'm like, now my newer systems that I'm building, I'm like, oh no, it's like an i9 with at least 8 cores and 64 gigs of RAM for anything that I do, because my browser takes up so much freaking resources, right? Now, never mind, like, I can deploy VMs and containers and it's fine, but my browser is like the biggest resource hog on my computer. Therefore, I'm like looking at ways I'm like upgrading some of my even more recent purchases because of the browser. But what you're saying is Firefox and containers tied to a Google account
works perfectly fine.
Good.
Although Google, there has been some research that shows that Google actually purposefully slows down their applications when you're using Firefox, or has done that historically, which is so messed up.
That is really messed up.
Yeah.
In any case, since we can't access some of these articles, which is frustrating, trends in cybersecurity. What are some of the trends? Jeff, I think you and I were talking about certainly the development model and DevOps in the context of security. Certainly that's a trend. I think the whole way that you deploy, I'm trying to get to the point where even as a security practitioner, I'm coding a project, I want to deploy it in a container. Like everything I write, I'm trying to get to the point where it's in a container that I'm deploying, that I can deploy to the cloud, that I can deploy locally. That's the point I'm trying to go to. Obviously, there's a lot of security concerns. I mean, we just talked about Docker vulnerability, right? That tie into that. I think that's one of the trends in security today is really security as code and configuration is the biggest, in my mind, having covered this industry with Larry and others, right, for almost 15 years now. I think today that's one of the biggest trends.
I would agree.
You know, the other thing is, Paul, I think there's more opportunity today than there ever has been before, because we're seeing this explosion up the OSI stack that it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? You look at some of the really big steering trends. Data center is now dead officially, right? I mean, people who are holding on to their data centers are doing it probably because they've got some group of folks in their staff going, "You can take it when you can tear it from my cold dead hands." And you know, everybody's moved cloud. So everybody's virtualizing everything, and so the entire software stack in the data center is completely API driven now. So you know that's networking to security services, the whole bit, and then you have application containerization and application virtualization layered on top of that. So I think that the next few years are going to be really exciting. I mean, we're going to see. Yeah, we're going to see some amazing things. But it's changing quickly enough that we all know, having gone around this cycle for several years, that there's going to be the same old things that are going to emerge, just with the new developments that are coming out with the new stacks that are being put on the market. Right.
I really think it underscores that as a security professional and in a systems administrator or network administrator, you really have to understand software and code at some level, like more so than ever before.
I think that's absolutely true. You know, at Black Hills, that's actually become almost our number one. In fact, I will say is our number one interview criteria. Do you program at some level? Do you have an understanding of code? Because if you don't, you're just not plugged into where the world is right now. I mean, it just is the way. It's the state of the art. You know?
It's why I stress in elementary school, Mike, right, that we have to start teaching code.
Absolutely.
You know, it has to be part of the curriculum, in my opinion.
My most recent interview question for something along those lines is, if you had to pick one, Python or PowerShell?
Oh, that's mean.
And that well, and then the question is, well, great, you picked PowerShell. What's the last thing that you coded in PowerShell, or the last thing you used in PowerShell, and how does it work?
My opinion is that if you're a pen tester today, you got to know both.
Yep.
And you got to have coded in both pretty recently.
Yep.
I'm sorry, if you're a pen tester, you absolutely got to know both.
I'll give you a first-hand experience. I was on a red team just a couple of weeks ago. I think it was 3 weeks ago. But anyway, we ended up in a position where the only thing we could access the environment with was actually a Mac OS X system, and you're still talking about a traditional Windows Active Directory environment. And so I was literally writing Python scripts the whole week to do custom attacks for everything, because the normal PowerShell arsenal that a lot of us have grown comfortable with using in a Windows environment, it wasn't available to me. So I was essentially just inventing as I needed to, and Python was my go-to.
So now, having said that, if I was applying to a pen test position today, I haven't done it like really any PowerShell coding.
Yep.
I would go to Pluralsight. I would get myself up to speed on PowerShell. I would write some scripts and see how fast I could learn and familiarize myself enough with PowerShell to be dangerous on a pen test, basically.
So, Joff, you just didn't go install PowerShell for OS 10 or macOS rather?
Well, I could have taken that route and fought through some of the dependency hell that would involve all of that.
Potentially losing your access in the process.
But now, also, having said that, when I hire people today, I think my mindset has shifted. I want to see proficiency in one language, and I want to hire for a mindset and an aptitude, right?
Yeah.
Like if I had someone that applied here that was good in any particular language, I would quiz them on what they've done, what their mindset is, and be like, dude, I can teach you, or we can learn together some other kind of new language, right? Like if you're really good in Python, again, you can. I'll buy you a Pluralsight thing. What is it, like $35 a month? You're going to go learn PowerShell, and you're going to be really dangerous with it, right?
Yeah. For me, I think about the like Roger's adoption curve, like the innovators, early adopters, early majority, late adopters. Like when we think about who we want to work with as teachers, we want the people who are in that early adopter range, who are willing to try and fail and do things. And it's oftentimes not the person who's the best with the technical pieces. That person might not have the flexibility to try new things and fail. And so it's really figuring out how do you hire for those kinds of proficiencies.
And what's interesting, one of the developer we're hiring who isn't old enough to drive yet, what's amazing to me, and it ties into this story about soft skills and communication, right?
Yep.
Is the people who are technically proficient, and again, in the end, it really doesn't matter the technology, right? I think what weighs heavier is, okay, you're proficient in a language or two or framework or two or whatever, right? But if you've got the soft skills and the communication skills to couple that, dude, we're off to the rail. I don't care if you know Java, Python, PowerShell, whatever it is. I can tell me what language you're proficient in. I'm going to ask you some questions, maybe ask you to write some sample code. Very quickly, I'm going to be able to know whether or not you know that language and are proficient in it. But in your email communications, your verbal communications, I'm also going to tell how good those skills are in communication.
Yes.
And I tell you what, this kid Jack that's starting for us, proficient in technology and languages.
I know who the kid is.
Yeah, Mike, this kid's emails.
I literally know who the kid is.
I know you do. Yeah, because he's exceptional, right? We're very lucky that he's committed to us, right?
That's hilarious.
For a certain amount of time per week. His communication skills are outstanding. I'm like, can I invest in your company today?
Yeah.
Right. That combination.
I would like to subscribe to your newsletter. This is relevant to my interests.
Right.
Yeah.
The combination of skills is what really, I think, sets apart those people that are maybe going to be exceptional in whatever they do.
Yep.
But the people that are going to create companies that are truly innovative, I feel, have the skills of technical prowess in addition to communication skills.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Two other.
I think you're dead on, and you probably should thank his parents.
Oh,
yeah.
And Joff, you are 1,000% correct, because I know his parents very well. They're family through marriage, right? And just exceptional people that I've known for years. So you're Joff again, spot on, dude.
Two places I would point out too that I think are interesting cybersecurity themes or whatever. One would be the kind of like supply chain hacks that are happening, like especially in the last year or so, seem to be like increasing and getting into that part where like whatever's happening in China is like getting hacked and played with, whether it's Huawei or these other ones. And the other one is like everyone and their mom using Shodan to like find vulnerabilities and then just drop them on the internet.
I want to go back to this dark reading article for 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
They talk about excellent communication skills, teamwork skills, creative thinking, problem solving, and functions well under pressure. I mean, those are four, even in just their headlines, 4 things I look for in every single person that works for the company that I created, right?
And
like Larry, Joff, right? Like these are the things you look for when you're looking for exceptional people.
Yep, absolutely.
And these are the things in schools that we're trying to assess for too. Like we're trying to figure out how do you build assessments that actually get at these things instead of like the knowledge-based assessment.
No one's good at all 4 of those things. Like, I mean, very few are gifted enough to like just be exceptional. But exactly, Mike. These are the skills, part of the skill set we need to foster through education. Joff.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, and that actually touches on what you were just saying. I also look for, when we're doing this at Black Hills, I look for somebody that is, when they get to their limit, is actually going to be honest and say, look, I don't know, but I'll find out, and I'll come back and tell you.
So important, Joff. Yes. I think it's a function of honesty, Joff, to be honest with you.
It is. Instead of somebody that's just going to go and bullshit you in your face. I mean, look, I've been around the track a few years, right? If you're going to just tell me bullshit to my face, I'm probably gonna know.
And Joff, one of the other approaches to that is that, not saying I don't know, but oh yeah, absolutely. I have some resources that I can tap for that, but let's follow back around on that tomorrow, and you spend the next 12 hours becoming an expert.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, I've even said that to a customer. I'll be dead honest to you. I'll say, look, I don't have experience there, but I got people I can talk to. Can we follow up? Just being honest. Don't try to string people along. There's no gain in that for anybody, right? You're not doing anybody a favor if you go down that road.
I think like knowing how to learn and do the resource and knowing what questions to ask and who to ask it and be willing to do the research is a skill in and of itself. Because look, unless you're like the Rick from Rick and Morty, like you don't know everything, right? Like he literally, I don't know if you've seen Rick and Morty, Mike, right? But he's the smartest man in the universe, right? So if you're not Rick from Rick and Morty, you got to know who to ask.
And that's one of the things that comes up often during interviews is that you don't bullshit a technical answer to the people that are asking you a technical question, because clearly they're asking you because they already know the answer. And when you bullshit, we know. The better approach is to say, I don't know. And my approach to that is, I don't know, but if I were to think about this logically, this is how I would approach the problem.
Exactly right, Larry. I have a very long multi-part question I ask on an interview every time. For that exact reason, I'm trying to solicit how the person will approach the problem. I'm not even expecting them to know the answer. If they do, great, but I'm trying to solicit how would you approach it.
Yeah, it's almost better if they don't know the answer, right, Joff?
That's right. It's better if they don't know the answer, because I really want to – I'm trying to find out what their thinking process is, right? What's going on in their head? What are the steps they're going to take? That's going to buy you points way more than just getting the right check in the checkbox,
I need to have you guys come and do like a presentation to schools.
Because like so much of what we do, Mike, like even in my technical segment, like when I get an error, I'm like, I don't know how to solve that error, right? So I rely on my experiences and go, all right, so it's this kind of problem.
And by experiences, you mean Google, right?
By experiences, I mean like before Google, like banging your head against the wall, right? Like, okay, I've got this, error. How do I solve this problem? Okay, well, I think let's make a hypothesis, right? I think it's this. All right, let me go down this path, right? And then, okay, well, that path didn't work. Let me think about what my next path would be if that one doesn't work. I mean, that's troubleshooting, right? That's
100%.
a mindset, and it's interesting. It's not to fault the educational system in the U.S., but it's something I learned by experience more so from education.
We're
right?
we're an education system that values getting the right answer, not the process of getting to it. And
Yes.
so until we value that process and until we value failure towards an end, then we're not going to get those outcomes.
No, it's
Right.
like the
Oh
whole
my God, could not have said that better if you tried.
Right?
You
Because
know?
like you guys know, like with all the technology we work with, like few people. I don't know. No one knows all the answers to all the technology things. There's
Nope.
experts in certain areas, right? Nobody
But
knows all
it's
the
not
ansers.
It's not possible. Your
gotta know how to
brain's
find the
brain's
answer.
Not big enough.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So true.
I'm not Rick.
Right? No. Yeah. Very few of us are. I mean, there's only. No, I mean you could say there's only one Rick, but that's really wrong. If you watch the show, there's a lot. Anyway, you gotta watch the show. Mike's laughing because he watches the show. Oh, Larry, Jeff, you guys have stories?
We do.
I don't know. Boy, it's late. Larry, shoot, Larry. You've got stories. I know you.
Oh, let's talk about something ridiculous and fun.
Yes.
We talked about this virus-packed laptop, right? It was packed.
Yeah.
It sold for $5.5 million. Is that
No, 5.5 million RM, which is not dollars.
Renminbi.
Oh,
Is that-
sorry.
Remini.
Yeah, $1.3 million US dollars.
What?
Wow.
That's what it says. Oh wait, selling for more than 1.3 MIL or RM5.5 MIL.
Yeah,
Is that something kind of cryptocurrency? Is that?
It's probably
No,
Romanian.
it's Chinese currency.
Oh, Chinese.
It's Chinese
Okay.
renminbi, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha.
But
I
yeah,
love you
wait.
so big, my doom. If you recognize what those are, it really means you're old
I don't
and you've
know.
been working in security for a really long time.
And wait a minute.
You know
wait a
what's-
minute.
what's
These are the best viruses available, and the
it
historical
didn't
viruses.
say the best. It's a virus. It's loaded with viruses.
And it's in China.
Yeah, Chinese artist Gao Odong.
The jokes just write themselves.
I locked eyes with Larry, and his gears, I can tell just by looking at Larry,
Yep.
his gears are turning.
I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it.
G-U-O. What is that
Wait,
in China?
what?
How do you pronounce it in Chinese? G-U-O.
Gaodong.
Gao, I would say Gao O, because there's an O in there. Gao Odong.
I'm just stuck at the Odong part.
You know, Odong. Odong he's the artist that created it, apparently. It's art. Viruses are art, apparently.
You see,
Yeah,
here's my
I don't
thing is-
dispute that. I don't dispute that. But to put a bunch of those on a laptop and sell it for
How does the
I
thing?
mean, what I said a couple weeks ago is like, I'll infect your laptop for free. I mean, if that's what you want,
I'll infect your laptop for free with those viruses.
sure.
In fact, if you have an old one, it's even better because that was really where they were targeted.
I mean, or you could. I mean, I'll give you a deal, like $50,000, like you know,
hell, 10.
How did
I'll undercut you on that one.
right?
But how did the thing even boot up and run? I mean, it's like
That's a pretty amazing part of it, right?
Maybe that's where the art lies.
Mm.
it probably booted up and within 30 seconds dropped immediately to a blue screen of death.
I mean, Joff, let me. When I say viruses, I love you so big and my doom. Like, does that not take you back to the early 2000s working in a university?
Oh my God, does it ever? I mean,
Or in
yeah,
healthcare.
we're talking about the Wayback Machine.
I mean, back then there was like millions of computers that had those viruses on it in universities alone.
Yep. Now, the question is that they said that the viruses were on the machine. They didn't actually say they were running on the machine. did
True.
they?
Good point.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There may have just been source code and/or precompiled versions on the system.
So it's a research. It's a research laptop. Sweet.
Yeah.
I want to talk about majority of CISOs plan to ask for an increase in cybersecurity investment.
This
Which
is
is
just
kinda-
like music. It's music.
Well, yeah, well, like so.
It's music, but I think it has to be applied appropriately.
Was it Jack Jones I interviewed? Was that yesterday? That was yesterday.
They all run together.
They do. Well, this week was weird because there was no Monday. I mean, there was a Monday, but we didn't work Monday.
Right.
But on Enterprise Security Weekly, we interviewed. Hold on. The CEO and co-founder of Tufin, which was awesome as well. Ruby's the man. Jack Jones. He works for RiskLens, but he founded the FAIR framework, Factor Analysis of Information Risk. And I have to say, I asked him, a bunch of questions about risk, and his answer was like just so intelligent and eloquent. And he said, risk is the probability plus the impact plus your resiliency, your level of resiliency, right? And if you think about all of the risk frameworks that we have, it basically said, look, like those are just kind of like audit checks, right? But when you break it down to probability and the impact of that, and then how resilient you are to that, what defensive measures you have, I'm like, he like summarized risk in like one, like not even sentence, like one phrase. Like it was basically you could pluck out 3 words. And I was like, dude, that was a good kind of level set to how we think of risk.
And I think that's interesting because we tend to classify the issues that we discover, the vulnerabilities in our pen test reports, as probability and impact to give a score. But we don't include resiliency. And
it's a good point.
And I'd argue, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking about this, like, shit, we need to include resiliency.
See, it makes you've been in security as long as I have. It makes your gears turn as well.
But I immediately said, shit, we need to include resiliency. But that's not something that we'd ever know. And then I said, but we exploited it and we didn't get caught, so your resiliency is 0.
Correct, Larry. Very
well, shit. We don't need to include resiliency because it's always 0.
And what I also told Jack after he said that, I was like, I think as security professionals, many of us, in my experience, when we consult with folks, in my own experiences, trying to convey risk to the organization, was we're really good at explaining impact, right? Like we're like, well, if someone exploits that machine and then like pivots and does this all, I'm like, that's going to be really bad. Like we're really good at explaining the negative impacts of a potential breach.
Impact 5 out of 5.
Right.
What I feel like in my experiences, and in many others I'm sure as well, is that the probability is what management kind of is their first kind of defensive measure to go, well, like, what's the likelihood that someone would do? Like, who would do that? Why would they do that? And how often is that really going to happen?
I think the probability helps set where they put that in the scale of when do we need to fix that.
Yeah.
Probability 1, if we get to that in the next year, we're good. Probability 5, shit, we need to do this like an hour ago.
Yeah, Google just put out one, it was like research on which forms of two-factor are most effective. And they looked at like if you were to run into a phishing attack, SMS versus soft token versus hard token. And that I think did a really good job of pulling out those pieces of like, this is how resilient you'd be. Like this works in like, I think it was like 80% with SMS, but like 97% with soft token, but like 99% with hard token.
Mike and I were talking about it before the show when we were having dinner. And we were like, we used, like I used a physical second factor, Mike used a soft token, right? Yep. And we were like, like the probability that someone's going to gain physical access is pretty low, right? I mean, that's pretty unscientific, but logically it makes sense. Therefore, could I have a physical token that's like physically plugged into some of my computers and I leave it there? That's probably an acceptable risk, right? And the interview with Jack, go check out Enterprise Security Weekly. It was a great interview. I also asked him about the organizations that look at the CVSS score and develop a policy around vulnerabilities that have a certain score. In my opinion, and again, I worked in vulnerability management for a long time, Jack had the best answer to that question. It was really awesome. So that story kind of made me think about when you're a CISO. And Jack started the interview by saying, look, early on the interview, it's like, hey, I was a CISO, and the CISO asked me like, what's the risk of us getting hacked, and like how bad are we right now, our risk level? And he's like, pretty bad. And he's like, so if I gave you like a bunch of money, like where would it be? It's like, well, it would be like a lot better. And he's like, he was testing me to be like, you don't really have a good way to measure that. And that's what prompted Jack to go create the fair.
That's awesome.
And so when this, story came up about CISOs, asking for an investment, it brought me back to that story that happened yesterday on the show. So make sure you go listen to that interview because
and I think
it
that
was awesome.
was absolutely to my point of it depends on where you invest that.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And how do you determine where to invest that? I mean, that's the CISO's probably primary challenge, right?
A box of the
that
blinky.
when you and Joff come in and you identify all those vulnerabilities, where should I invest the money? In what to protect? I mean, that's
clearly a
the
box with a
issue.
blinky light on it.
You know, I think what you just expressed is probably the substance of every post-engagement conversation that I have.
Right.
So, and it makes me think about the MITRE attack matrix. If we were to take that matrix and maybe not universally, but in certain areas of the matrix, have an estimated probability of occurrence measure added to the matrix, it might give CISOs some comfort in answering that question.
Or lack thereof.
But,
I mean, you could almost cross-reference that with industry and or like overall criticality to function, right? You could kind of like if you're industrial control systems or financial or university, like where do you fall on the spectrum?
Sounds like a great opportunity for another framework to cross-reference these frameworks.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's really what it's all about. And John Strand actually in the news segment in yesterday's show was actually talking about that.
Yeah.
That at SANS, actually, they're working on cross-referencing critical controls with MITRE attack framework. Exactly what you're saying, Larry, cross-referencing that to give us kind of a better picture of the visibility into how do we make decisions about risk.
Right. It's like doing the whole thing with like HIPAA, PCI DSS, and
GLBA,
GLBA, ISO 27001, and putting all of those controls together. So when you have this thing, and you can go,
I mean, you could almost call it a consensus estimate probability, right? It's not something that is a hard and fast rule. It's something that the industry would potentially agree on as a general consensus. So it's a guideline, like all of these things are. All of these things. Guidelines anyway.
Absolutely, and I think you take those guidelines and you, for me as a pen tester that has to write a report that's going to go to our customer and dealing with all those, I take those guidelines and approach it as this is what we understand about your business and how your business operates and what this would be as an impact to your business because of the criticality of where this sits as business function.
Yeah. There was just a Verizon report that came out about data breaches, I think in the last year.
The DBIR,
Yeah, and I feel like they broke it down by industry really nicely in those ways of saying, like, in healthcare, these are the critical vulnerabilities. In education, these tend to be the critical vulnerabilities. I found that really helpful.
In healthcare, it's probably MSO 8067.
We're laughing because we know it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. That definitely still happens.
That is so sad.
We talked about the Baltimore city leaders blaming the NSA for the ransomware attack. I don't know that we need to comment any more on that. But
all I can say is,
good Lord.
All I can say is, hey, I got a buck, dude. Take this.
Yeah,
it's called passing the buck.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And Ars Technica again did a very good job of. Hold on, I want to read some of the stats from this article, which we didn't get to cover. So they said in order to overcome years of neglect, Baltimore would have to raise its IT spending to the $128 million to $156 million range, according to their OIT strategic plan. That has not happened. The city's fiscal budget for IT was roughly $31 million. It included $4 million for storage, hardware, and firewall upgrades, $217,000 for consulting services, $5.5 million to replace obsolete police, fire, and emergency services 800 megahertz radios. Is that a thing, Larry?
Yep.
Is there a security vulnerability with that, or
it's all in the clear.
Okay.
Oh wow.
Okay. Yeah, it's all in the clear, and if they move to something else like P25, it's all encrypted. It can be encrypted.
for a city the size of Baltimore, $3 million for a citywide hardware and software refresh program. That's for a city as major as Baltimore. That
seems low.
That
right?
seems low.
Really
yeah, I
low.
agree, Mike.
Well, but then it seems low, and then I think the key to all of that was the beginning because of years of neglect.
Right.
Like
Oof.
this shouldn't have been something that they are now having to dump $150-something million on. This should have been $15 million over 10 years.
Yeah.
There was also a really
classic-
compelling stat in here, if I can find it while we're talking
Yeah,
about.
and Joff, your comment was?
Oh, it was a classic legacy debt.
Yeah.
I mean, you see that happen all the time in more industrial settings, but it's absolutely true in technology settings as well. If you ignore it for long enough, then you're going to build a legacy debt.
So what they said is Baltimore's 2018 budget only allocated $65 million for citywide information technology operations, 2.5% of the city's total budget. The compelling thing is that's less than half of the average for U.S. cities, and most of that budget is controlled by individual city departments. Only roughly $30 million of the 2018 budget went directly to OIT based on city data, with $7 million of that covering the department's payroll for 112 employees.
So that's like poor governance. That's just like it's not organized correctly.
But I thought the comparison to other cities was something I had not seen in the context of a breach like this. Like basically, the money you've allocated to upgrade your IT is not as much as all of the rest of the similar organizations and cities in the United States.
Arguably, what? So they said the 2%, and that's like, and not just cities. I think that's about half of what the average IT budget was, and maybe now even less than half of what the average IT budget is in an organization.
True. Yep, that's a great point.
And then you think about that, and now you filter all that down, and it's individually controlled. How much of that IT budget is actually spent on security? And it's probably significantly less than what we would expect international average of IT budget.
There was
being
only
spent on
one
security.
department in the city that had moved to the cloud. So much of their IT budget is going to more traditional on-prem. Yeah.
Even if it
solutions.
is, I still think that you, regardless of whether it's cloud or it's traditional,
still a cost with cloud, Larry. Yeah.
There's still cost, and there's still a cost to having security in all of those, and you still need to allocate those resources. And I suspect that percentage was probably still pretty low.
I hate to pick on Baltimore, but after I read this article, I was like, ooh, that just doesn't paint a pretty picture.
Yep. That said, I don't think it's a picking on Baltimore. I think that there are many other
municipalities
and or organizations that fall into the same thing. There's that joke of if your coffee budget is more than your IT budget, you have a problem. And I think this is a classic case of that. May not be their coffee budget, but...
Yeah, Baltimore's just in the spotlight right now. I think probably most of the municipalities across the U.S. are suffering from this same problem. They just don't want to be in front of the camera.
Yep.
Yep. It's true.
And Baltimore doesn't want to be in front of the camera, and they're passing the buck to say, hey, NSA...
that was the other thing.
You done did it's not good. So...
That's interesting.
And guess where I'm working next week?
The NSA?
I mean, no, I'm working
in Baltimore.
Baltimore.
Oh. Doing some incident response there, Jeff?
Yeah, that's it. Incident response.
Yeah, so there was a letter they have a screenshot of that's basically saying because the NSA leaked Eternal Blue, we had this major hack, and therefore the federal government needs to cover all of our cost plus.
They leaked Eternal Blue, and you were given plenty of notice that Eternal Blue has been leaked, and go patch your shit.
Mm-hmm.
There's no words for that one. That is wow.
Because how long ago was Eternal Blue been out there? How long has it been out there for?
A while, a year or more.
Yeah.
Shoot, it's been over a year.
Over a year.
If you can't patch your shit for critical vulnerabilities in a year,
then you're Equifax.
No comment. You had no comment.
Well.
Right?
Yep. It's funny, but it's depressing as well.
Yep. I mean, that said, we see organizations that even still have issues patching for critical and CVE critical in 3 months. And I get that, but critical CVE, no. critical to your CVE with some temperament for compensating controls in 3 months, that's still critical. 3 months is not it,
And here's the thing: is it that hard? I mean, honestly, if you're running Microsoft gear, I got to give Microsoft some credit here. They release the patches. You just apply them.
But even for the latest RDP vulnerability, they release patches for legacy operating systems, which is like unheard of.
The biggest question that that you find that I think in many organizations is, great, there's a patch. Get it deployed. Does it require a reboot?
So Zero Patch, which is an organization, released the source code and a patch that you could apply to legacy systems, and they were working on getting it on other platforms as well, but I think it worked on XP, SP2, or some older version of XP that you could deploy live. It didn't require a reboot. And I'm like, if Zero Patch can do that, why can't Microsoft?
And I think that's true across every system. That if there's a critical vulnerability in Microsoft operating system from desktop to server, you name it, and it requires a reboot, there's going to be some delay in the application of said patch. If there is, just in case, don't know spillage.
Just pour a little wine.
But if you,
what, Larry, I would argue with that though. I think this becomes an architecture question because, if you are deploying modern cloud resources, which a lot of people are, the ability to switch out one service with another one almost in a millisecond or less and transparently is there at your fingertips.
Agreed. And it then becomes a matter of regression testing and data acceptance.
Here's my thing. During the break, Joff and I were talking about Python development and upgrading the libraries that you're using in your Python application, which could be impactful to your code. What we weren't talking about was, I've got this Python application, maybe it's deployed in Docker, maybe it's not. Maybe it's tied to a Python version, right? We weren't talking about what version of Linux operating system the Python code is running on.
Right.
Conceivably, and listeners will weigh in on this, right? But in my experience, which is somewhat dated in this aspect, if you've got a Windows application that's running on a Windows operating system, and I apply a patch for the remote desktop services, why would that affect my application? If it does, that's a really, in my opinion, really poorly written application that is so dependent on an operating system level patch. Or is it just a difference in the operating systems? Even still, a patch to, let's say an organization is not rolling out the RDP patch because it could break an application. Why would a patch to an administrative function break an application?
Yeah, well, so
again, there may be applications that use RDP and all that stuff.
Exactly, applications that use RDP, application as part of the RDP thing that is patching a core library used across multiple functions. We saw that many times back in the day. Yeah, there was a patch for Outlook, yet many people didn't patch it because we don't use Outlook, yet it was also a core library that infected Internet Explorer, which was getting exploited in the wild many years ago. That type of thing.
To me, something's broke. Like software in today's day and age, in my mind, should not be that fragile.
But my point, Paul, was that's irrelevant. Because your ability to swap out an image and replace it with another one is like millisecond instant now.
Yep.
You shouldn't really care.
I agree, but in the Windows world, that's not necessarily the case in a lot of circumstances. Look, cloud and Linux, totally agree, Joff. In a Windows platform, I may have that one physical PC connected to that one particular application or hardware application, right, that is running that software, that they're like, well, you can't upgrade because if you upgrade it, everything's going to break.
And
is software today still that fragile?
Yeah. And I will take that to the networking part, Joff, is if you all of a sudden have this critical Cisco vulnerability that we were talking about at the break, you now need to upgrade the version of the operating system on your core internet routers or your core internal routers.
Yeah, look, that's a whole different problem. I
don't
used to-
argue that it is.
Look, I don't want to like make people feel bad that are in that situation as an administrator or a developer either. I think it's the fault of the system, right? Like in general, right?
Yeah.
Like you should be able to develop and deploy code to a system. Administrators should be able to patch that system without this really high probability of breaking. Sure, there's going to be edge cases, right? But that high probability of breaking stuff, developers and administrators, I feel, are done a disservice by Microsoft of being in that situation. I think more modern Microsoft operating systems have accounted for that. And I commend Microsoft for their latest updates in code and their whole even approach to, as a company, I commend them.
Right.
It's that legacy stuff that I feel bad.
And for me, like coming back to, and my context is always school systems, but with like 15,000 school systems in the United States, is it really the most efficient and effective way to do this by having 15,000 directors of technology need to deploy this thing? Or is there something that could be done by 50 people at a state level that could patch these things for them? Like there's got to be some economies of scale or some capacity building work.
We live that at the university, Mike, for sure. Yeah. It's that whole centralization versus decentralization question. And certainly I think when it comes down to security, sure, there's arguments either way, and I totally get that. But a more centralized system, I think, has a better chance of being more secure. However, you could be more vulnerable at scale in a centralized system than decentralized. Right. Certainly, Dan Geer had a lot of, papers on that, which I totally respect. But I think if you fast forward to today, your notion of 15,000 versus 50 is very relevant, especially as we talk about deployment to the cloud and DevOps.
Yep.
I think there's a push towards centralization being a lot more secure.
Yep. And then the question also becomes, now you spin that a little bit, I think that conversation we frame sort of to the medium to large to Fortune 50, Fortune, you name it. But how do SMBs deal with that?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I think about from my perspective, like as a small to medium business owner, I have a couple of web servers that are not monetized, but they're a blog that could be monetized. And I think about that as being a small business owner, one blog, one person. You know when the last time I've updated that shit was?
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you the last time I applied patches for WordPress on my own hosted installation, that was over 2 years ago.
I agree, Larry. Even if you're I don't think we should look at the cloud and newer technology as kind of like the utopia of security, right? To your example, right? We certainly use a lot of that technology here. It still requires some due diligence on the part of the business owner to make sure that stuff is updated. The longer you wait, the worse the problem gets, even if you're in the cloud in that situation. Mm-hmm. But it's still, I think, worse if you're on premise, right? And retailers have that problem because I think they almost have to have some type of on-premise device, right? I mean, even if it's still in the cloud, like there's still something that physically has to friggin' swipe the card because the consumer is in the physical location that has to swipe the card.
Right.
It's true. More stories.
The crypto miner that kept coming back? What?
Yeah, so basically they were abusing credentials. I mean, this, I think, speaks near and dear to your hearts as pen testers, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can go to great lengths to try and secure your systems. The lowest common denominator, as we've talked about in education, as we've talked about so much, especially this year, about security, it comes down to identity and access management. And that's really where it fell down here, was the crypto miners could come back because they were essentially just brute forcing the password. Right?
Yeah.
There is an article about getting rid of passwords in the show notes as well.
So was it the 8 best ways to get rid of passwords?
They talk a lot about different, or talk about a lot of different technologies, I should say, from Microsoft, Duo, Ping, Secret Double Octopus, which is one of my favorites. Have you heard of?
I haven't heard of that one.
It's a Israeli startup that is in the identity and access management or identity space. What I love about Secret Double Octopus is they have a patent on if you've got an older smartphone that doesn't have biometrics and it has a camera, you can take a picture of your 4 fingers and it'll read your fingerprints from it and authenticate you that way. I did a briefing with them, and fantastic company, great people, awesome technology. But the thing that stuck out to me in my mind, and the briefing was, probably over a month ago now, was that they had the patent on that technology. And I thought that was really cool, because you think about like a school system or even a large enterprise that has 50,000 users, you might have a user that doesn't have biometrics on their phone, and like, what do you do?
Right.
And it allowed them to use their technology without a password to authenticate, based on the fact that I physically have the phone, right? Like, that's a thing. You can also, in Secret Double Octopus, because I did a demo with them, you can also enable I don't know how to phrase it, but like basically
the
environment
telemetry of the phone.
Thank you, Mike. The telemetry around the phone, how the user holds it. That you can turn that on and off, but they can include that as kind of like basically like a shit detector. Like, if someone's holding the phone differently from the way you normally hold the phone,
or if it's flat on the table and they're doing something that way,
they can ask for further authentication. But one of the factors is I take a picture of my 4 fingers and it validates my fingerprints, which I thought was really cool.
Nice.
And it just stores those as a hash and then looks at it through those over time.
Pretty much, and it relies on the secure storage inside of your smartphone, which, I mean, there have been vulnerabilities but again, I think we come back to probability, and I pick on this certainly with multi-factor authentication, that, and especially the biometrics, and I think it was Heather Mahalik that first pointed this out, that like, she was like, Paul, look, like your fingerprint, like, it's not really your fingerprint once you get on the phone. Remember, phones are computers, and it's just a bunch of zeros and ones. It's a hash. Like, and so, but it's stored in the secured protection. Qualcomm has had some issues with vulnerabilities there. But again, the probability that an attacker is going to go to those lengths, again, still something you should look at. But I think that a lot of the getting rid of the password, I think, is so much a step in the right direction to more security. It kind of outshines some of the other issues that we could, as security practitioners, poke holes in.
One, Secret Double Octopus. Love the name.
Amazing name.
2,
amazing name.
The logo is very Minecraft-esque. Love it. Gonna have to look at that. And on this note,
it's very unique. Like I agree. On a tangent here, right? The name and the logo, I was like, that's
really cool.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Badass.
So, speaking of which, and I want to propose this. There was the question earlier in the YouTube comments about password manager for kids.
Ooh. Let's talk
That's
about it.
a good one.
Like, what do you recommend? And I'm like, oh shit.
I use LastPass.
But for
kids, for kids,
for kids.
So I only know one tech department in the entire state of Rhode Island that uses a password manager, which is crazy. But they do, and they do a great job with it. But they only use that on their tech department team. So not even the teachers are using it yet.
But
and
how do
not
you
the students.
but how do people get by without a password manager?
So what they do is, by having terrible passwords is the answer to that one. But to your point of like, how do kids do this? So everyone basically uses Google, and Google, they use OAuth to SSO into everything else. But that Google password is still often terrible.
And they're not enabling 2-factor on Google.
No.
Which is good.
Right.
I mean,
the
it's
2-factor is good. The fact that there is 2-factor is good. Yeah.
Google's 2-factor is good. So I keep my Google credentials outside of LastPass, and I enable I have a unique password for my Google account. And inside of Google, I require a physical token to access that. However, Google, being like user friendly, if you don't have your 2-factor, it automatically defaults to any other second factor. So it'll SMS your phone, it'll use Google Authenticator,
and
or
you can do SIM swapping, and then you're in a lot of trouble because you get your SIM swapped.
SIM swapping is an issue,
but less so for schools. But I think to your question, the specific one I see a lot of districts using is I'm forgetting the name of it, but essentially it creates a unique QR code for each kid. and the teacher holds on to it, and the kids basically hold it up to their Chromebook.
Gotcha.
And it logs them in, especially for little kids, because like little kids can't remember
that's
passwords.
There's a couple
They
of
can't
different
type either, right? Like I mean,
there's a couple of different companies I've done briefings with that use QR codes as part of their
obviously it opens up
two-factor
other
process.
threat model issues, right? Like
Right,
if a kid takes a
sure.
picture of it, there's all those things too. But I think like as a relatively quick and efficient solution, it's pretty good.
And the chances are that the kindergartner doesn't have a lot of sensitive data. If they're so there's that.
I think if we can progress to the point where password spraying is a lot harder,
Yeah.
and a QR code accomplishes that,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Until someone maybe figures out a ubiquitous way to
Yep.
like
Generate
bypass
QR
that.
codes, yeah.
Sure, but
Dynamic QR codes or something of the like.
Yeah.
right.
But I
That-
think password managers would be so amazing. I mean, just
Yeah.
to teach kids how to use them as just like a basic of learning how to use a computer.
So here's your $1 million idea, listeners. Password manager for kids.
100%.
or even a great
Password manager for kids that can scale to when they grow to adults.
Yeah.
in kind of like an Apple model of getting kids in school into your technology.
Yep.
If you have a password manager today, make it available for free and promote it to educational institutions today, so that when they're going through school, I know I use XYZ password manager when I graduate and go to a job, and you have an enterprise version of that, which all of them, I mean, almost all of them do, right? That's the one I'm going to go with.
This is the long con, as it were.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know. I guess did it really work out that well for Apple as well? I mean,
I think we all liked Apple who came through that time period of computers. I certainly grew up liking them, but
I still think major enterprises though are using Windows though,
Yeah.
and not Apple, right?
yeah,
So
no,
I
for
don't
sure.
necessarily translates. but
Although Apple has certainly increased their game, and the things that the decision I'd argue the decisions they've made as far as their ecosystem have made a lot of sense.
Oh yeah, and their two-factor is awesome, right? Like if you have a trusted device there, it's like, do you want to add this device to your network or whatever? Like that part's wonderful, right? Super seamless.
yeah, the schools I think suffer from if you've got a Google like an G Suite account or whatever the equivalent education is. The management of those devices is a complete nightmare. Like you can manage devices in Google's ecosystem, but it's a nightmare.
Well, you know what's really interesting? It's actually, in terms of IT spend, way easier to manage Chromebooks because you're effectively managing browser extensions. You're not managing a ton of like independent machines.
Sure.
So you can just push extensions to machines.
Your
like, so
browser is your operating system
exactly.
at that point. Yeah.
So like you lose obviously a lot of functionality because you can't do a lot of really cool stuff with like video editing and that kind of stuff because it all has to happen in the cloud and there's a lot of latency. But like, yeah.
Yep. The interesting one that I'm looking forward to for my oldest daughter moving into middle school next year, there's an ice cream social in August, and that ice cream social is the day they pick up their Chromebooks for school.
Yeah.
And I think that's awesome. And then the question is, all right, it's a Chromebook, it uses Google services. How do they get access to Google services? Because my daughter has had a Google account since the day she was born in the hospital. Like we typo squatted or we domain squatted that email address because of that. Literally the day she's born.
I did that for my daughter with Proton Mail.
She's
She's
literally had that account since the day she was born.
Yep.
Like, we were in the hospital, 2 hours of sleep. I'm registering accounts.
Yep.
And can she use can she use that account?
Yep.
Can the school support that account?
No, it's a separate account.
I don't think you want to touch that. Yeah.
And then
schools
the
have a separate account because I like
And
my
then the
kids too
the
have
question-
had Chrome. Like I bought them Chromebooks basically because I knew they were going to be using Chromebooks when they got to a certain point, so they knew how to use them. But the accounts kind of flip over, Larry, to the school account. Yeah.
And then the question becomes, if they can support that account, what happens when her account is two-factor authenticated and she's in middle class and she's like, hey, teach, I got to get up and get my phone out of my bag.
Right.
We don't do phones. Well, I got to get my phone so I can 2FA into my account so I can do my schoolwork.
My oldest son uses both the Google account I have for him and his school account simultaneously. And he knows how to flop
bounce back
between
and
them.
forth.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy. Yeah.
And I think one of the things you'd want to be careful about is because the school owns and runs the device, they're going to be able to access anything your child's doing on the device, which means they'll be able to get into their, like, as you know, you're a security researcher.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah,
that's
stuff
a
is
good
super
point, though. That's a good case to have, like, my kids to have their Google device that is through my account and their school device is through their account.
Yep.
and just have two different devices.
So that's a great question. School provides this one. The school can do anything to that. Can they log into their own Chromebook with the school account?
They can. Yeah, they can.
They should be able to. That's a good
No,
question.
my son did. Yeah, my son does right now.
Yeah.
Good.
But the two-factor one is a really good push, so we should just like do a tour of all the districts in the state and have conversations with them about using
Two factors. Yeah,
Yeah.
important.
Yep.
Awesome. Did Joff drop off? I know it's getting late. Wow, it is
No,
really
I'm still
late.
here.
Oh,
I was just saying, hey, we probably should wrap up.
I know. I was like,
Sorry,
oh
guys.
my god! I just looked at the time. Okay.
You
Well-
know, it's okay by me that we're going late. I'll explain later.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening and watching to Paul Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Take us out, Larry.
Over and